These railroad tracks in our home city of Tulsa, Oklahoma, separate two distinct communities. South of these tracks, you can find affluent homes, good schools, and thriving economic activity.
On the other side, in North Tulsa, communities are struggling to combat the existence of gangs, drugs, high crime rates, and poverty. These tracks in Tulsa are not the only example of a physical barrier that separates socioeconomic groups in the United States. The 16th Street Bridge in Milwaukee and the 101 Freeway in Silicon Valley are among other examples of landmarks that serve as physical barriers between socioeconomic groups.
To understand why these barriers exist, we must turn our attention to the history of segregation that still haunts our cities today.
The creation of the Homeowners Loan Corporation, the HOLC, a New Deal byproduct that was trying to help people afford homes.
Beginning in 1934, in an attempt to combat foreclosure, the HOLC would take a city map and section it into zones. Areas in green were titled Grade A. These were areas where mortgage leaders were willing to make the most loans. The Grade B areas, shown in blue, were still desirable for loans, and Grade C, in yellow, were definitely declining.
Grade D, the areas outlined in red, were labeled as hazardous. This is where the term redlining originated. The majority of people in redline neighborhoods were people of color. Because of the ongoing problem of discrimination, minorities saw more significant disparities than low-income white Americans in Grade D neighborhoods.
So therefore, essentially cut off access to large amounts of capital and mortgages for people of color in this country.
Redlined HOLC maps were made for hundreds of cities, including Brooklyn, New Orleans, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, San Francisco, and many, many more. Tulsa, our hometown, was also redlined under the HOLC. The railroad that now signifies the separation between North and South Tulsa runs along this line.
During the period when redlining was legal, the black population of Tulsa was 2.4 times more likely to be denied a loan than the white population. As a result, many of our neighborhoods were separated based on race and income.
Because redlined areas had little access to affordable loans, it was hard, if not impossible, for families to buy new homes. Property values dropped, the wealth gap widened, and city planners deemed the areas unfit for investment. This meant fewer resources and opportunities were available for families in redlined areas.
Although the Fair Housing Act of 1968 outlawed redlining on a federal level, its effects continued long after.
What happened over time is that since the communities that had higher property values, because they were nice neighborhoods, because they could purchase their properties, they were able to generate more funding for their schools.
By 1970, there was a 27 percentage point gap in home value, not between A and D, but between C and D neighborhoods.
Richard Rothstein, the author of the book The Color of Law, researches redlining and other issues often pertaining to their effects on education.
Low-income children who grow up in a middle-class neighborhood are much more likely to be middle-class as adults than low-income children who grow up in a segregated neighborhood. So many of the problems we face in this society stem from residential segregation.
So how exactly does housing inequality affect the future of American children? To answer this question, we spoke to an associate of Mr. Rothstein's.
It all comes down to housing. And he has an article about how if a black student is living in a neighborhood where there's more air pollution because a highway runs through it and there's more exhaust fumes, he might have asthma and he might wake up in the middle of the night and be more tired, and so he might not perform as well at school. And if you have a school that's full of black students that have that kind of either single issue or comorbidity, they're going to be at a disadvantage because of where they live.
Redlining actually has more of an effect on education than student performance. The way schools are funded in the United States also plays a role in the quality of education that different neighborhoods receive. When redlining was outlawed, this feedback cycle didn't change. The same families were still in the same neighborhoods, sending their kids to the same schools. They were stuck, and many people still are today.
Redlining excluded people from community development for almost 40 years. Although the Fair Housing Act of 1968 officially outlawed redlining, people and resources stayed where they were, and not much changed.
Our obsession with individualism allows us to really put blame or think about these communities as not not doing good by themselves.
Since redline areas never had the same access to development as other communities, people's hard work didn't pay off as well as it could in other places.
At the end of the day, the implications of our government's past actions still need to be addressed.
We propose starting with federal support of mixed income housing plans that include subsidies. That way we can prevent gentrification while also bringing together people of different socioeconomic groups.
Americans have paid a great price because we haven't fully addressed the effects of redlining. Our country needs leaders who will prioritize every individual's highest potential, regardless of their race, income, or housing status.
We hope that our new Congress and President will achieve this by closely analyzing bills, incentives, and proposals, and choosing the best policies that will bring Americans closer together and officially erase the red line between us.